Welcome to the Humans of Hospitality podcast. I know so many of you listening to this show love your local bar, your local restaurant, maybe your local hotel, and have so many fond memories of time in hospitality businesses. This is the podcast where we get to chat to the human beings behind the scenes of that industry. Maybe the chefs or the bakers or the coffee roasters or the gin distillers or the craft brewers or the entrepreneurs, but all doing an amazing job of making sure that hospitality stays interesting and the big, dull, formulaic brands do not take over our high street. Please enjoy the show. In this week's episode, I'm hugely excited to get to sit down with Gareth Banner, who's the MD of the Ned in London, part of the Soho House and Sydell Group. Now, I saw Gareth chat about a year ago at a caterer show, and him and the Ned blew my mind, and I knew he was someone that I had to one day get on the podcast that didn't even exist at that time. So he's in fact part of the inspiration for this very podcast you're listening to. Now, there has never ever been anything quite like the Ned in this country before. Created from the former headquarters of the Midland HSBC Bank in the heart of the City of London, the Grade 1 listed building is now home to, and I'll take a deep breath, 10 restaurants, 250 bedrooms, 6 private event spaces, a spa, a gym and a club with well over 3,000 members. In any given week, 30,000 meals are served on the ground floor alone, and that does not include the thousands of other glasses of wines and coffees that people pop in for, or the meals that are served in the event spaces, which must also clock up into the thousands every single week. As its MD, Gareth says modestly, for a single address, there are a lot of moving parts. Now, just 3 years ago, when he was looking through the dust and the scaffolding at what was the final phase of 5 years of renovation, he knew it was going to be special. And as you'll hear, his career, which takes in stints with global brands, the Marriott, as well as iconic boutique hotel, the Hempel, is also impressive. It went some way to prepare him for this amazing project. But actually, as you'll hear, the biggest learning has happened since the Ned opened its doors to the public 2 years ago. This is an incredible space, an incredible adventure, an incredible story, and I very much hope you enjoyed Gareth's and the Ned's mind-blowing episode. Gareth, thank you so much for sparing the time to come onto the podcast. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
So I'm in the city of London. Quite often I do these podcasts and I'm in the middle of the country somewhere introducing a farmer and you can hear mooing cows in the background. But I'm right in the heart of the city. Can you just explain where we are on planet Earth, please?
Yeah, we are located on Poultry. Poultry takes its name from what was once the poultry markets, bang in the middle of the City of London, opposite the Bank of England. And we are occupying what was formerly the East Midland Bank headquarters, which became Midland Bank headquarters, which became HSBC. And we got our hands on this amazing building, Grade 1 listed, Edwin Lutyens designed property back in about 10 years ago, and have spent 5 or 6 years renovating it, and we've been open just over 2 years now. So thanks for coming to see us.
No, it's amazing. So we're in the, what was this, the vaults down here? We came underground a little bit, I think.
Yeah, so we're currently sitting on what we refer today as basement level 1, and basement level 1 was, exactly as you say, it was where a lot of the safety deposit vaults were kept. There are 17 vaults in total on the lower 3 floors of this building. All of which have been repurposed for one reason or another. And actually the room we're sitting in, we call it the Snug today, but actually this was a private safety deposit room where people who needed to make larger or more private, have a private area for deposits would be able to come with armed security actually, and be able to deposit whatever it was that they needed to deposit, and then would be escorted from here back into the vault, which is adjacent to us, where they would then lock their possessions away for safekeeping.
So this one room would have been for one person, would it, that we're sat in now? Or?
So actually, yes, it was, and this was a larger room, and the rooms to the left, we actually call these the kennels. They were nicknamed by the bank the kennels because they look a bit like dog kennels, I guess. And there are 6 individual private rooms along this long corridor here where people would be able to have some more privacy. Yeah,
get quite a few diamonds in here, can you? It's a pretty.
I
I don't know what we're in. It's
could.
probably 3 or 4 meters square. So yeah, okay, interesting. Really looking forward to coming into the Ned as is now and the details of running it, because this is hospitality on a super grand scale. So I'm excited to do that. But I want to start a bit further back, if that's okay, and just learn a little bit about how you got into hospitality. So what was the trigger? What was your first memories of an interest in this sector?
I'm not going to be one of these guys that say it was an accident, but it wasn't a deliberate plan either. I guess sometimes you don't realise what your calling is until it sort of smacks you right between the eyeballs. And for me, I was fortunate enough to spend time visiting restaurants and hotels growing up, for holiday purposes really, with family, and was always curious about sort of hotels and would always sort of sit there as a child and observing what was going on. And it was a curiosity more than anything else. And when I was waiting for my A-level results, I have a long summer after my exams. I decided to take a job to earn a bit of pocket money, as it were, working in a kitchen of a quite reasonable pub, but it was only a pub. And I was, I think, 3 months in that job, and it was a heat wave that summer, and it was a pub kitchen did not have all the mod cons that you might find in a place like this today, and it was 100+ degrees almost every day during service, and long days, and I remember thinking, I love this, and I was waiting for my A-level results and was planning to go off and read, business and Spanish and other things at one of the universities that specialise in all that, and I remember thinking, I'm not sure I've picked the right course here. And as it happened, I didn't get the grades that I needed. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I went to see my director of sixth form, who said to me, what have you been doing all summer? And I said, I've been working in this restaurant. It's been brilliant. And he said, well, have you thought about a career in catering? And there are degrees, actually, that can sort of help underpin that. And the rest is history. So I went off and I studied, and that then led to a placement. I went off to the United States, where I did 12 months working in a big hotel, and suddenly realised that this really was what I wanted to do. And so I suppose hotels were my first love, although I have run restaurants as well. I just find the whole thing fascinating and have never really looked back. So I'm really a one-trick pony now.
Amazing. You have got to be a certain sucker for punishment, I think, to be in a hot pub kitchen and go, yes, this is the life for me. But like you say, it's a calling. Hospitality is a funny business for that, I think, isn't it? There's definitely easier ways to make a living, but it's something really good fun about it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if, exactly as you say, it is a funny old business, and it's not for everybody, for sure. And actually, whilst there are easier industries, I actually talk about that when I hire people here at the Ned. I say, there are easier industries and there are definitely easier jobs than working here, and you have to really want to do it. And if you're not 100% in it, it's just not going to work out, because we ask a lot of you, and I think it's a rare breed of individual, actually, that can cut it at sort of the very sharp end of what is high volume, high quality, and I think there is a lack of awareness, really, of what it takes to operate at this level, and I'm very lucky that I've got 1,000 people around me who do a brilliant job and allow me to sort of look very good sometimes, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Amazing. I'm laughing because I've sat in a number of interviews where I think I've literally tried to talk people out of applying for the job and go, do you realise you're going to be working every weekend really late, and it's really hard, you've got kids, you're not going to see them, and you're actually trying to, and they still go, I still really want to do it, and you go, okay, if you're crazy enough, then come and join the party. So it's good. You mentioned that just then that you prefer the hotel side than the restaurant side. Why is that, as a matter of interest?
I don't know if I prefer it. Hotels was my first love, and I think that's because I went to the States. I worked in this hotel with 500 rooms, and it was fascinating, like all these people coming and going and why they were visiting, and you sort of got to know them a little bit. A restaurant is sometimes a bit more transactional. You have a limited window. You have an hour or two to sort of look after somebody, and then they're gone, and then someone else walks in, which is also interesting. But as you when people sort of check into a hotel, they're sort of in residence, you sort of get to know them a bit more. And I really enjoyed having this sort of not protracted relationship, but sort of getting to know. I mean, some people clearly stay a night, but others would stay several nights, and from all over the world. And it was a really international sort of experience that I had. But restaurants are something I love dearly as well. And I've spent much of my career, either running restaurants, or indeed like I am today, I'm responsible for 10 restaurants, and I have lots of people that help me to deliver what we do. But I'm fascinated by that part of the business, and if I wasn't, I probably shouldn't be in the job I'm in.
Yeah, and you're not. You've still got hair, unlike me as well, Gareth.
It's great.
So
It's great.
Slightly, only on the head. That's which one of the restaurants? Which one of the restaurants was that? So you were big hotel stuff. You were in the US running the Marriott, and then you came back to the UK with the Marriott Group, did you?
Yeah, I came back, and they sort of suggested I might consider their UK sort of graduate program. I did that. Thought it would be a good place to start. Marriott was very good to me. I learned a lot about sort of big hospitality business and controls, procedures, lots of the things that frankly are sort of unsexy, shall we say, but really underpin how you drive and deliver consistency and sort of operational excellence. And there was this watershed moment for me where I realised that whilst I had learnt a lot working from Marriott and sort of absorbing all the sort of SOPs and all those things that they churn out very, as well as anybody, there was very little that they were asking me to work out for myself. And I thought, hang on a second, if I'm not careful, I'm going to sort of be sort of conditioned to sort of spending my career implementing the manual rather than working out, I suppose there was a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit about me. I was like, well, I'd like to work out what's right for this business. And that sort of cookie cutter approach works to a point. And I think it was probably about the same time that people were starting to want more individualized experiences and didn't necessarily want to listen to the same soundtrack in the same lobby, and all that sort of good stuff. And it's that prescribed in the big brands, and it has to be for good reason. And I remember thinking, hang on, now's the time for me to go and see what it's like to work maybe in a more independent environment and have an opportunity to make my own mark. And I did that, and I did that in a couple of businesses and privately held hotels in London here. And then I remember sort of reflecting on that and thinking, well, hang on a second, I've done this really big hospitality stuff. I've done a sort of smaller independent, and actually somewhere in the middle is probably what I would like to really do, because I think there's good and bad in both. And I guess in some ways I've sort of ended up in that position now where I say I work for a sort of a hospitality group rather than a hotel chain. I have a lot of autonomy about how we operate this business. But by the same token, there is a bit of infrastructure around me that helps me to do things, on a scale such as the Ned, which, without a bit of a small army behind the scenes, we just wouldn't be able to do what we do today.
Yeah. Okay. I remember chatting to a GM from the Marriott a few years ago, and I was chatting about just rooms, I think, I'm wanting to do. I've only got the 12-bedroom hotel, and that audit process, just it'd be really handy to kind of have, a checklist that we could look at. And he said, I'll get you the one from the Marriott. Don't sue me, Marriott, in case that was a bad thing to do. Yeah. And he bought me this, it must have been 40 pages of A4 of a list of things they check just when they go around the bedrooms and audit the bedrooms. And I remember going through it going, oh my God, at this level, if I gave my housekeeper that and said, I don't know, she it would have taken her a month to finish reading it. So that level of prescription, I can imagine, becomes frustrating.
It's a really good point, actually. Do you need 40 pages to tell you how to clean a room? And there was something else that was 4 pages on how to answer the phone. I argue you don't. You might need 4 lines on how to answer the phone, but actually they probably, I think they take it too far. And I understand why, but that's probably not quite where I felt I wanted to be.
Okay. I think we'll come back to that because I want to talk a little bit about how you, the pre-opening of this. But one of the hotels you ran, then you went from big to large, because what was the 40-bed? It was the Hempel, was it? Was the sort of 40-bed more boutique-y? Was that very different? What sort of things did you learn in contrast to your sort of, 200-300 bedroom and your 40-bedroom boutique?
Yeah, so I think, the Hempel had 40 rooms and 10 apartments. And what I realised, it was a pretty small business with quite a high profile clientele, and the opportunity to really individualise the experience. that everybody was a name, wasn't just a guest. And what does that mean? And how do you, the location of the Hempel as well was in this beautiful sort of Cravenhill Garden Square, where they'd filmed the movie Notting Hill, one of the scenes anyway from the movie Notting Hill, and it felt extremely residential. And I was, we would use the language like, actually, these that we're dealing with guests that are in residence, rather than just checking in for the night. It was very much about trying to make them feel almost local whilst they were with us, and therefore, did we sort of recommend that they go and visit Buckingham Palace, or would we tell them about a little antique shop around the corner in Portobello Road, and what restaurants would we send them to? We can all list those sort of household names with big celebrity chefs, or do you know there's this fantastic up and coming chef who's doing amazing things, and he's going to be a big name maybe in the future. And we were able to really, it was almost like you were inviting someone into your house rather than you were there to service a sort of the needs of a business traveller. Although there were many business travellers, it was much more considered rather than actually sort of a means to an end, as it were.
And can you take some of that learning then and scale it to something the size of this? You 250 rooms here. Was there some nuggets that you took from that you've been able to implement here, or does it become impossible at scale?
It gets harder. There is no doubt. Anyone who says it's easily replicated on mass level, that's just not true. I think what we've been able to do is we still talk about the hidden gems, for example, and the sort of off the beaten path type places to recommend, using that concierge example that I gave you a moment ago. So you shouldn't be told all about what time Buckingham Palace opens and the Tower Bridge and all the rest of it. But you should get a more of an insightful recommendation. Similarly, I have a lot of guests here who, actually don't necessarily want to be engaged in the same way. This is a purchase, when they book a room here, this is a purchase of convenience. They are flying in, they've got meetings, they want a room that's ready on time, and they haven't got time to particularly get to know you or you get to know them, and they just need to be serviced efficiently and be on their way. So I think it's about trying to understand what each guest needs, and we have resource in this building that researches to a greater extent, who each customer is, why they're coming. The internet is a very useful tool these days. You can find out a lot about people's backgrounds and what their responsibilities are, what their companies do. And that evolution, of course, in the last 15 years has been enormous. So we have, I suppose, high levels of intelligence now that we are able to use. And I think being emotionally intelligent and working out what somebody actually wants from you rather than just assuming every customer wants to sort of have a big hug and spend 10 minutes chatting about how their day's been. So the answer is a bit of both.
Yeah, and how do you train that? Do you use personality profiling to train your concierge team on to recognise the different personalities? I'm having flashbacks to when I worked in sales, and you'd have your dominant individuals who you knew would be coming in, and they'd be straight to the point. You could almost tell by how they filled in their registration card at reception as to if it was just your name. You might have 10 things that needed filling in. If you just put your name in, you were probably going to be sort of in a hurry, didn't want to kind of muck around. But if you doodled a little bit and you'd filled it all in and you'd maybe drawn a pretty picture, then they were the ones to chat to and spend time with, and they were dominant, influential, steady and cautious, I think. And I remember having to write the letter on each one. Do you use any kind of profiling techniques with concierge, or are they just expected to have that emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is we don't have a tool, as it were. We do carry out training, and I do believe that people who are naturally emotionally intelligent, they can read. Body language will tell you a lot, and you're absolutely right. There are so many signs or clues from the moment someone walks through the front door as to sort of quite what they're going to want from you. And I think what we do is we make sure people, whoever you are, we make sure people understand what is available to you, and it's up to you to decide. In some cases, as a guest or a customer, how much you ask of us in terms of that level of interaction. So we clearly approach, I guess, a high value, long stay, sweet guest differently to a sort of, entry level room, one night, in and out. There's lots of ways to sort of segment your your guest profile, if you like, and we have technology that also allows us to, recognise preferences and ensure that those that are returning, have some sort of continuity. And I think we're very good at really simple things like making sure that if we know somebody likes a particular, especially in a building like this where there's so many rooms, if someone likes a particular room, that we'll try and honour that they get the same room every time. It's quite nice when you go back and you feel like becomes your room rather than I've just got that category of room, but I happen to be in a different floor or a different part of the building. And slowly but surely we get to know people. We have a very high level of repeat business here. It surprised me actually. And because we have so many assets within this building, we can see where people tend to eat their breakfast. They have 6 options, and this person always tends to go to that particular restaurant. Or when they're here, they generally like to get their nails done, or they get their hair cut here. And so, because it's quite rich in terms of outlets and the number of different reasons you can visit and use the property, slowly but surely we build up quite a sort of an in-depth, if you like, mosaic on a lot of our members and our customers that stay. But there are also some, by the way, that pass through and we have little knowledge of what they do and why they came. But I guess that's the game, isn't it?
And have you written your own software to manage that data and get visibility? Because it's very easy to get the data, but sometimes quite hard to interpret it. Or have you got something off the shelf that gives you that? Yeah,
we've not written any of our own software. We do customise a lot of software. And I guess what's slightly unique about the Ned is that we have we have public and we have members, and we have different software. So I have a lot more software here than I have in hotels I've run in the past, and that allows us to often dig in and understand, particularly where we've got members staying, allows us to understand what they need and what they expect, and we can also link that back to a lot more information that we extract from them as members. So when you sign up to being a member, you obviously share a certain level of information beyond what you would share if you were just a hotel customer, and so there is customized solutions, if you like, rather than specific or bespoke software that we've developed for ourselves. But yeah, tying it all together and making sure systems to interface and what have you, it can be a minefield, and often the quality of what you get out is subject to what you put in. So we sometimes do a good job of that, and sometimes not such a good job, but we're getting there.
I get very excited by the potential of technology. I always dream that people walk into my restaurant and it pops up. We use iPads for ordering, and it pops up on the iPad and says, Dave's just walked in the front door. It's his birthday on Tuesday. He's got a table booked, and he was last in last Wednesday. And he, his favourite beer is a Strella, or his favourite wine's that. And I dream about that possibility. And I sit with lots of techies who say, yes, this is possible. But the reality of actually trying to build something that tracks it and manages it and makes it automated, and makes it feel natural, and also doesn't freak them out. Like you say, we'll do the same sometimes in, maybe doing some Facebook research and stuff like that. But there's a fine line between, scaring the hell out of them for being a stalker and actually getting it to be what we want it to be, which is just feel like very natural hospitality. But when you scale that, you need some help in essence, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And maybe one other example from a sort of food and beverage perspective is we partnered with Open Table as our sort of reservation booking platform. But because we have 8 restaurants, public restaurants under one roof, you often turn up, a guest or a customer will turn up and say, I've got a table booked for lunch, and we'll say, which restaurant? And they'll say, I don't know. My colleague booked it, or my PA booked it. And essentially we had 8 separate diaries, and actually working with Open Table, we've managed to say, hang on, that doesn't work. I need to be able to search someone's name, and it will need to spit out, this person is booked in this restaurant. So we've actually started to, I suppose, our challenges that we faced have been, in some ways, research and development for some of our partners who have subsequently developed their own technology to help service our requirements, and are now sort of sharing that with others. So, it's been an interesting journey, and there's lots of stuff like that we didn't necessarily envisage until it sort of hit us between the eyeballs.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect example where you start with something that just feels very logical, and then you go, actually, yes, to have a centralised database with the same with venues, to have one database that goes across venues, you think would be very simple, but the techies behind the scenes say, actually, that creates these challenges. Of lots of those conversations. Do you think, you mentioned earlier about restaurants, being more transactional. I always think it's interesting as to how long you can impress somebody for. So when somebody comes into a restaurant, it's quite easy to look after them for a couple of hours and exceed expectations and really look after them. And I always think it becomes more challenging the longer somebody stays, because when you go to a hotel, you've got to try and make everything, ideally better than it is when they're at their house. And that can be easy from a nice kind of bathroom and a nice room, but, cleaning your teeth or actually having a better night's sleep in a hotel bed compared to your own bed. And I find that the longer people stay, much as I love it, because I get to know maybe the personalities and their stories, but it becomes increasingly difficult, I think, to impress. So it feels easier in a restaurant transaction than a hotel transaction. Would that be fair, and have you found a way of sustaining that?
I think that's very fair. We did a little, not a time and motion study, would not be accurate, but we looked at the average hotel guest staying for 2 to 3 nights and how many interactions do they have with you, and it was scary. And when I say interactions, I mean that could be passing somebody in a corridor. That's the physical act of checking in or going to a restaurant having breakfast or whatever it may be. And we believe that it's somewhere between 2 and 250 interactions in the space of 2 days. And how do you make sure that every one of those, it might be very subtle and might be very fleeting, but leaves a positive impression? And I mean, for example, walking out of your room, down the corridor to the lift, a room attendant or a room service server passes you. How do you make sure they smile and look you in the eye versus possibly look down at their feet and think, goodness, don't talk to me, there are, and I'm being very honest and transparent, some of our housekeeping team, as amazing as they are, English is not their first language. Sometimes they don't have the confidence. And how do you bring out the best in the individual and ensure that every opportunity we leave even a slight impression that is one of, that was nice, and that was welcoming, or that was friendly, or that was warm, and it's really difficult, and it comes down to obviously hiring great people as best you can, and I still believe that despite all the science around interviewing and behavioural interviewing and looking at people's CVs and track records and references, until they're in your business, it's very hard to truly assess whether you've hired the right person. And by then they're in. And then how do you make sure when nobody is at 80% of capacity here. Everybody, if anything, people probably feel they're over capacity a lot of the time. And therefore, how do you make sure you find time for training and coaching? And those are real life challenges that we are faced with, but we're very, very serious about them. We recognise that the investment will pay dividends. We've spent £200 million on this building, and we've built something which is not a pop-up in any way. I certainly hope not, at least. And for us to be sustainable in the long term and to sort of become one of those businesses that is talked about in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now as a sort of an institution, which is kind of my vision for it. And it'll be someone else's job to take that on. But I really believe and really want to ensure that we do things in a sustainable way now. And that does require, high levels of investment in both, physical time and payroll and other costs.
Mm. It's a great example, that quote of 250 to 300 points of contact over a few days. It's been the number of people that I've talked out of investing in restaurants or tried to explain how complicated a business is and why it's challenging. Because I always say to them, it's a really challenging sector, and that's a great example. How do you make sure that every single person, every single time, like you say, looks them in the eye? That level of complexity in this industry is something that I don't think your average person just walking into a building appreciates. And I've been out for dinner so many times or stay places with friends who, I don't know, might complain about the littlest thing, and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to be that bore that actually says, can I just explain what's probably going on behind the scenes at the moment and how many people are involved in that transaction? You think you've just ordered a coffee, but there's the waiter or waitress, there's the guy behind the bar, there's the kitchen porter who didn't fully clean that cup, or the person that didn't notice it had a little chip, or whatever it might be, but there's 26 people behind the scenes there that have made sure that cup of coffee has got to your table. And not only that, but we've served 1,000 cups of coffee today, so if even 1% of those coffees has not gone out bang on, then this is the implication. And then I realised I should just shut up and enjoy the many great aspects. Continuing your trajectory then, so Lots of different hotels. 2016, was that when you first heard about the Ned? You mentioned the building's been around for sort of, or you've been involved, or somebody's been involved in it for 10 years. How long were you involved before it opened?
So I joined the business in 2016. I got called in December 2015 about possibly coming to have a conversation with Nick Jones, actually, about this building. I got a call and I sort of politely said, it's mid-December, we're flat out. I was running some Pancras Renaissance at the time. It was a pretty sizable operation in itself. And anyone who's got time to go and have a conversation about a new opportunity in December probably isn't busy enough or actually very good at their job. So it was a very sort of thanks but no thanks. And I got back to doing what I was doing. And then I didn't think too much more about it, actually. And then in January, the phone rang again, and the same voice on the phone said, it's not December anymore. Will you come and have a chat with Nick? So I did. And it was a fascinating conversation because whilst I was keen to actually meet him and get to understand a bit more about what he was doing, and we hadn't met before, he sat down with me, and all he brought to the meeting was a book of 100 renders of what is the Ned today. There was almost no words in this book. It was like a picture book, and I thought, and I've worked on new openings, you end up with a dozen renders if you're lucky. And this was 100 renders, and this was only a selection of. The entire building had been completely drawn to the precise details, the artwork on the walls, the soft furnishing designs and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, this is just incredible. And I think, does this place really exist? And that fueled my interest to actually, I want to see the physical, I want to see this building. And I came and saw it, and it was covered in scaffolding. There were 500 builders doing their best to what looked like at the time dismantle it rather than putting it back together. And despite all that noise and dust and sort of activity, it was immediately apparent to me that this was a very, very special building, and it could be something that probably London hasn't really seen before, without wishing to overstate it. It's sort of its impact, if you like. But I knew that it would be one of those jobs that if I was offered it and I turned it down, it would probably be one of those, you might have a regret one time in the future. And I always sort of said, don't have regrets, and therefore I felt, what, this might just be one of the once in a career job. And I thought, go for it and say, here I am.
Glad you did.
Yeah, it's a privilege, and I mean that sincerely. And there's not many jobs I have described as a privilege. It's a true privilege, and it is the most rewarding job I've ever had in so many ways. And for that, you think, well, is it the dream job? And in some ways, it really is. It is also the hardest job I have ever had. I don't think anyone involved in the project really had got their head around what we were taking on. We talked about it being ambitious, and we talked about its scale. But I think if we'd really confronted what we were dealing with, we'd have talked ourselves out of it. And there's a fine line between being realistic and sort of evaluating all the risk, if you like, and also saying, if we're not careful, we won't do this. And somebody who's been a very good sort of mentor to me, a guy called Marcus Child, who's a sort of he's a sort of motivational speaker, but not in the traditional sense. And he said to me, just think of those guys at NASA, they didn't know whether they were ready to go to the moon or not, but they just had to go. And I remember thinking, that's a really good analogy. You can find so many reasons to not do something, but looking for the reasons to do it is a lot harder, but can often lead to the most rewarding of experiences. And I think that's, without trying to compare the Ned to NASA, I do feel like it's been one of those things. And even my industry peers that I'm close with, so said, I think you might have bitten off more than you can chew here, and I think it'll be all right, Monday to Thursday. But what the hell are you going to do at the weekend? Have you seen the city on a Sunday? And of course, you try not to sort of let those doubts creep in, but they are like, I was thinking, I'm probably thinking the same thing as you, to be honest. And in some ways that served as motivation, and allowed me to hire a team that I thought, not blind optimism, but people that were like, I'm up for this, and had an energy about them. And when you're opening a new business, you don't inherit very much, and you get to make a lot of those decisions for yourself, and you'll be judged by them. And I remember thinking, wow, hang on, I've suddenly got this amazing opportunity, but the buck will stop, good or bad, the buck will stop here. So it fueled me on, actually, got me out of bed in the morning a bit earlier, and it got me to bed a bit later, and that period of pre-opening is very precious time, and the work that gets done then really sets the tone for what happens when the doors open. And I if any had any regret, actually, it would be that I wish I'd been involved a bit sooner.
I thought that myself, to be fair, and we'll come back to that probably, because when I saw that you were involved, it was about a year before it opened, I think, wasn't it? I thought, how the bloody hell did you get ready in a year? And I'll come back to that question. But before we do, and not everybody will appreciate the scale of this place, and the reason I'm here is I saw you talk 6 or so months ago, and I thought, oh my God, what an insane place that is, an insane job. But can you just paint a picture of exactly what goes on here? Maybe some numbers, number of restaurants, people employed, that kind of stuff that just illustrates why this is such a beast.
Yeah, in headline terms, for a single address, a single site, there's a lot happening. There's a lot of moving parts. We have, for example, 1,000 staff working here, and that is on the books. I tend not to count the sort of the functions that we outsource, which is not much, but we do have assistance from some agencies and some contractors, of course. But there's 1,000 headcount in principle. Gross revenues of this business are north of £100 million. Over £50 million is coming out of food and beverage. So we look to do £1 million a week. And when you think about that in sort of revenue, it's one thing. When you think about it in terms of transactions, that's a huge amount of transactions. It's somewhere in the region of 30,000 plus people a week that we serve a meal to on the ground floor alone. And on top of that, we've got events, which is a floor in this building, which can be several thousand meals as well a week. We serve a best part of 15,000 staff meals a week. So when you start rolling the numbers up, that's just the food and beverage component. On top of that, you've got 250 bedrooms. We run an occupancy in the very high 80s. We've got a members club, well over 3,000 members now, and they have access to facilities almost around the clock. You've got a spa business here, which is not insignificant. I've mentioned the private events, and on top of all the sort of people that come here to dine, there are a lot that literally pass through for a coffee or a glass of wine at the end of the day. We don't count those as covers, but I would hazard a guess that there's probably another sort of 30,000 people a week who we can't directly track, as it were. But there's a huge amount of footfall, and that takes a lot of management, and there's a lot of intensity about that. The city is still pretty traditional, whereby a lot of people have sort of desks that they have to be at, between 9 and 5, and so you get these big spikes in demand at breakfast time, lunchtime, after work, rather than other locations I've worked in London where it sort of tends to sort of be very steady all day long. So yeah, we do all those numbers I just referred to in sort of big tranches rather than sort of very steady, consistent, and predictable demand patterns.
I've got to have a lie down, Gareth. I'm getting a migraine just thinking about the scale of that. Is insane. But you didn't run away. And I'm a big fan of two things, I suppose. Action always beats intention. So I think you can think about these things, but fundamentally you just need to start. And then once you've started, I think you work out that within reason, everybody's winging it to an extent. Nobody's going to have all the answers. You can't, I don't think, have all the answers before you open something like this. You just have to start. Having said that, you needed to do a shed load of work to at least give you the best possible case. Did you appreciate before you came in how big it was going to be? And if you did, why on earth didn't you run for the hills?
Very good question. I mean, again, I was a bit like a moth to the flame. There was something about it from the word go that I knew could be special. And I suppose everyone has that one, maybe not the one big job, maybe you get more than one big job, but I suppose we all have that that one big moment in us, and I thought this could be mine. It's sort of the ambition was it was almost comical how much ambition it was, and I thought, well, have a go, right? And I think Nick is very, very visionary, and he talks in a way that's very compelling. And actually, what I'd probably learned is, vision is one thing, courage is something else. So we can all sort of spoof away over a beer about what we might do. And I thought Nick's courage was infectious, and that was a big part of it. And it's not just Nick. In fairness, Nick, we're the first to say he's got an amazing team around him, and he really does. And I was impressed, hugely impressed, in a very short space of time as I went through that sort of recruitment process with what the company's track record was, and some of the people that were in the organisation, who are clearly extremely talented, and what was quite nice about it was that I was being surrounded by people that weren't all from hospitality. There was a nice balance of hospitality people, but also people that were experts in their field, but might have a retail background, or might have a tech background, or might have a design background. And yet we were all trying to deliver a sort of big hospitality project. And so that was very stimulating. And I almost saw it as sort of an opportunity to get sort of not masterclass, that sounds a bit too grand, but an opportunity for development. When you get to general manager level, a lot of you always continue to learn, of course, but a lot of your formal development is done. And I saw this as almost like this potentially a great finishing school, and I knew that there were things that I could add value to. Soho House as a company was not a traditional hotel company. In fact, it was more clubs and restaurants, and yet my hotel background was probably a nice complement to that. But there was also a huge amount I was going to learn, and I thought you don't get chances like this very much. And it was really that I thought, this is for all the reasons that it might be a bad idea. There are too many reasons why it could be a very good idea.
Sold it to me. I think you're right, and what a unique opportunity it is. So you mentioned the sort of 100 pages of visuals that we already had. Getting involved only a year ahead. Were you involved in the design of how the space was going to work, or was all that done? What was your sort of primary role in that first year? And we'll come back to recruitment, but the design and architecture side.
So unusually, the company employs all its own in-house designers. So we didn't go out to an agency, and do a sort of beauty parade and say, right, who are we going to work with and who's our designer of choice for this project. And what's very clever about that is not only do you have everybody's on the same team, and everybody should be more aligned, more naturally aligned in the objectives. Certain designers, third-party designers can often have their own particular style or view of the world, rather than necessarily always adhering to or listening closely enough to the brief. So I think straight away we sort of eliminated some of the challenges you can face when dealing with designers, but also that the hotel had been designed conceptually, and that we knew where the restaurants were going to be located, but we hadn't necessarily signed off on all the detail, and the design process ran in tandem with the construction process. Whereas in a more traditional environment, you design it on paper, you might do a sample room or agree a certain level of specification, and then that gets delivered by a contractor that will build it for you. And the design, when it comes to reality, when the project is delivered, can often be 5 years out of date. Something that was designed 5 years ago may not necessarily be current or relevant anymore. And so whilst we had designed or agreed on all the important stuff when I joined the project about number of bedrooms and number of kitchens, we were making decisions up until, the best example probably is Kaya, which is an extremely successful restaurant for us on the ground floor, and per square foot it's probably our most successful restaurant actually. 2 months pre-opening, we had not decided what that concept was going to be. And we really wanted to be in touch with what the latest trends were, where we saw a gap in the market. Otherwise, we probably would have ended up with something, that might not necessarily have been, quite so well received or so relevant in sort of, the current day. So it was a really interesting way of approaching the project, and to work alongside a designer and as an operator to be able to provide my input and say, I love it, but I don't think it's durable enough. And for them to say, good point, let me go away and think about that again. And to have a real living, breathing relationship in real time rather than saying, well, that was decided, it's been signed off, I'm afraid that's what's been ordered. Now, that does put you under pressure in other ways. So I'm not making it sound like it's straightforward, because it certainly isn't.
I like the fact you made it sound like it was by design, or we didn't want to start thinking about it until 2 months before we opened in case, we got it in case it wasn't in vogue. I'd have been sort of slightly crapping myself, I think, with it 2 months ahead going, oh, right, so what should we put in this space? But come on, carry on.
No, I mean, yeah, exactly that. And you really... I think at some point you have to make a decision. There comes a point where we cannot turn back from this, otherwise we will not open on time. But pushing the boundaries of what might be possible, and it's things like, isn't it? I remember I remember there was a whole load of sort of furniture carcasses that were sitting in Italy and in Bali, I believe, but we hadn't decided on whether it was going to be leather or fabric and whether it was going to be burgundy or green. And you can actually, there's still quite a high level of customization that can be done at quite short notice, and it takes a special sort of approach, and it takes probably a little bit of extra budget in some regard to be able to push things through at short notice. But I think you end up with a better product at the end of it.
It certainly does. Well, I've opened a few restaurants, and it's nice to know that even at a big scale, it operates that way, because I work on the presumption that the efficient and the grown-up business approach of doing this is design it, get it right, get a few companies in to quote and spec it, and then get the best quote to actually go and build it. Whereas the stuff I've done tends to be generally motivated by the season. So in Bournemouth, we have to hit the summer. So fundamentally, we've always built places when they need to open, ready for the season. And we haven't had the luxury of kind of acquiring those buildings ages in advance, so we've literally designed and built at the same time, and it's expensive because you end up having to throw a load of labour at it to hit your opening date. It's great fun, but it's stressful, and that's at a small scale. Doing that on something of the scale of this is incomprehensible, but it makes sense. I wondered how you'd pulled it off in a year. So that ability to design and build as you go, I guess, was helpful. And presumably that's continued post-opening. If you've needed to make tweaks and changes, having in-house designers is helpful. Yeah,
I'm very lucky. I make no secret of the fact that I have a resource here that I've never had before. So, I have an in-house graphic design team. I have an in-house interior designer who's on my books. So even now, if I wander around and I think something's looking a bit tatty or I'm not sure it's quite right, there is somebody who is 30 seconds away from wherever I might be in the building. I say, can you come look at this with me? And we can take a view on it. The sort of wider Soho House team are very close to the detail as well. And I have access to Nick and or others if he wants to have a say over how we actually might change something. He might feel strongly about it. We don't agree on everything, and I think it's important to be able to challenge one another. But we also made, whilst I think we got a lot of it right, we definitely made mistakes, and I think we learned from that. I mean, a good example of that is that a large percentage of the furniture, for example, in this building is genuine vintage furniture, and it complements the aesthetics and the sort of scheme that we went for in trying to sort of bring back that sort of 1920s sort of faded glamour and what have you. And whilst some of that furniture gives the place a real character, something that was built 100 years ago is not going to withstand the rigors of 6 turns a day in a restaurant environment or a bedroom that people might have a tendency to want to party in, a suite, and you think, well, that table is not going to withstand someone jumping on top of it, all that sort of stuff. So how do you make sure that you have that individuality and that sort of vintage look and feel, at the same time know it's going to stand up to the test? And we've learned a lot of lessons around that. We've probably, had to replace some things sooner than we would want to have. I can't pretend that is not the reality. But it's also given us, a really special product here. And I think, if anything, I'd like to think the Ned will will sort of wear in and become better with time, rather than it might look a bit naff and old hat in a year's time.
And where you've had to take over an existing space, and restaurants all need to have an individual feel, have you managed to keep a lot of the original character of the building and still get presumably an individual character into each restaurant as well? Because that must be very challenging.
Yes. Interestingly, the Grade 1 listing of the building prohibited the removal of almost anything. And I mean almost anything. So whereas the ground floor is seen as this big space, which is sort of comprised of 8 restaurants now, when there was no one here and it was just a big empty space, it was like this big room. It was carved up by these slightly annoying banking counters that got in the way. And what the design team did was used those counters to become sort of natural partitions, and the big circular oculus, in other words, a sort of the big circular reception desk was right in the middle of the ground floor, and they put a lid on it, and it became a stage for entertainment. And so once the sort of floor plan was agreed, and that this banking counter will become a long dining table, and this will become a stage, and this will become this teller's booth will become a sort of a hostess station. Once that was done, it became much easier to look at the ground floor as 8 individual projects rather than just one big project, which is how you look at it when you start with this massive room, and using the cuisine to tell the story. So making sure that whatever we did with real authenticity. And you go to Cicconi's, for example, which was the only brand, and Soho House owns Cicconi's, so it was the only one that was established, and it was not a copy and paste exercise, but the DNA existed. But we made sure Cicconi's is run by Italians, and we made sure that Kaya is run by Asians, and Café Sue, our little French patisserie and coffee shop, is predominantly run by French and sort of continental Europeans, and through that and the cuisine, we sourced a lot of the design and the inspiration from those parts of the world, and the graphic design team did a brilliant job, and the content team did a brilliant job, I think, in sort of writing or helping to create the narrative that goes behind it. It actually was hard, but easier than I thought it was going to be. And I do feel that you sort of get a fairly authentic experience. If you go to Millie's, you feel like you're in an English brasserie, and you go to Cicconi's, I think you feel like you're in an Italian restaurant, even though you might only be sat 10 meters away from each other, as it were. So yes, I'm probably oversimplifying it, but
so we've only got an hour, so it's probably good. But I could ask you 30 questions on that. But so each of those restaurants, you run them all yourselves, and they were all your own, in-house kind of design and concept and stuff like that, basically.
Yeah. So Cicconi's, as I say, was a brand that existed, and that's a pretty tried and tested formula. It's very similar to Mayfair, only we have pizza here. So that was sort of maybe one step of an evolution. And we put these 2 wood-fired ovens in the middle of the ground floor. All the other concepts were completely original to the building. And our joint venture partner here, Sydell Group, who are well known in North America and are soon to open in the UK. They have a new project in Covent Garden. They developed Zobler's, which is our sort of New York deli / diner. And, they're based out of New York. And, the principal of Sydell Group is Jewish. And, he brought real authenticity to that concept. And the rest was, all developed from scratch, really. But we have a bit of form in that we operate a few restaurants and the like around the world. So, as an example, we have Soho House in Malibu, California, where it's a very sort of clean, healthy, interesting and original sort of menu, featuring ingredients actually many of which I hadn't heard of. What are taro chips and goji berries and all these sorts of things, and we were able to draw on some of the success that we've had elsewhere, and so we'd love to sort of use that as the basis of inspiring a design or a concept here in London. So for example, in that real life example, Little Beach House, Malibu, California, there's a small restaurant here called Malibu Kitchen, and there's a lot of DNA that we've pulled, and we were able to use the expertise that existed in California and say, can you help us develop a menu that will be, true to what you stand for, but also maybe customise it or tailor it a little bit for sort of the UK market, and slightly different ingredients, of course, that are in season at different times of the year. And that was probably the most fun part of the project, actually.
Amazing. Did they all work?
Yeah, they did. I mean, they shouldn't have done. They definitely shouldn't have done. Let's look at the law of averages. Like 2 or 3 of them should have been a flop. And I can't pretend that some didn't ramp up quicker than others. But as a general rule, they were all immediately successful. The one actually that I think is an interesting, there's a couple of concepts. So Zobler's and Kaya, I've talked about already, they both had quite a significant takeaway component built into their business model. And the reason for that is that, as I said before, people have quite traditional jobs around here. They eat lunch at their desk often, and they need to run out, grab a Pret or something else and take it back. And so we wanted to make sure we weren't missing a trick to be able to service the sort of the community that were our neighbours. And we found that we were doing very little takeaway business. And I think, what's wrong? It's the same food, the packaging's good. It's the same food as you get if you sit down. Why are we struggling with this? There's 800,000 people going out for lunch every day. And I must say going out, I mean, having a takeaway lunch every day. And it became apparent when we got to sort of know people and talk to them a bit more, the customers that is, they said, well, it's just such a great building. Why would I want to take it away? I'd much rather eat in. We thought, wow. And I suppose it's a lovely compliment. And so, we had to sort of undo what was quite an expensive and quite a considered sort of takeaway concept or sections of the restaurant that were designed for sort of food collection, and turn that back into, well, you can turn that into a bar that you can sit at rather than a counter you can order from. And that was very interesting. And probably one other that was very interesting for us was Zobler's, which was, I mentioned as well, was a deli, essentially, when it launched. And it did extremely well at breakfast and did extremely well at lunch. And we really struggled in the evening. And I thought, again, it's the same food. Like, why would it struggle in the evening and yet successful at breakfast and lunch? And it's quite simple. I think the deli is not quite as established a concept in the UK as it is in America. But the reality is that if you're going out for lunch or breakfast, so deli sounds right. But when you're going out for dinner, do you go to a deli for dinner or do you go to a restaurant for dinner? And so by literally adding the word, we make a couple of tweaks to the menu, but essentially adding the word deli and diner, almost overnight, the dinner trade corrected itself, and it was almost as busy as it had been within a very short space of time at lunch and at breakfast. So again, subtleties of how you position things and how people sort of perceive them in their minds. This was a big.
It's amazing. It's why it's the art of the restaurateur and not the science of the restaurateur. I think, isn't it? Just those little nuances.
I think you're right.
And can you just turn up and walk into some of these in the daytime then? Or is this all by reservation? Are you fully booked?
I mean, theoretically, yes. There are definitely times of the year and times of the week when I would strongly recommend don't make a long journey to the Ned unless you've made a booking. And maybe the best example of that is Sundays, when we were terrified we would be sort of empty and the place would feel like a ghost town. And we put a huge amount of emphasis on how we might create a destination at the weekend. And we came up with this idea that we would do this completely overblown, sort of borderline ridiculous Sunday carvery meets the great sort of pub lunch meets a buffet that you might see in the Far East where, sort of 30 metres long and all you can imagine. And we called that Ned Sunday Feast. And there are lobsters. I won't share with you quite how many lobsters we buy. It almost feels like there's going to be none left in the sea. But we pile lobsters up, sort of 3 feet high. You've got ribs of beef and, sort of huge cuts of other sort of animals and meat. There's salads aplenty. There's a whole dessert buffet in its own right. And we refined it and refined it and refined it. And, we made lots of mistakes in terms of what we thought people wanted and what they didn't want. But, we now have an 8-week waiting list for Sunday lunch. We have over 1,000 people that come between 12 noon and 9 p.m. And on the back of that, it's like the great Sunday roast, I suppose, on steroids. And on the back of that, we recognised that there might be more opportunity, and we now offer a feast. We offer 4 feasts simultaneously on a Sunday. So there's the English feast, which is Ned's Sunday feast, which is the main one, and then Cicconi's does an Italian sort of feast. Kaya now does its own Asian-inspired feast, and then we do another feast in one of the members' restaurants downstairs, which is a bit of everything. And they are extremely popular, and for us, it's made the sort of city very accessible. You get couples, you get grandparents, you get huge families, you get birthday parties, you get all sorts. And it's made Sundays actually a really fun day. And the first time in my career that actually in some ways Sunday is the busiest day of the week rather than, the day where everyone sort of has it off and catches their breath. So it's been really fascinating.
That's amazing, isn't it? You only do things at a grand scale, don't you? It just sounds huge. Is that a fixed price for a feast then if you're doing a buffet?
Yeah. So yes, exactly. So Ned's Sunday feast is £49. Right. And you can sit have as many lobsters as you want for that, and roast beef and glass of welcome drink and amazing. Salads and desserts. I mean, it's good value. And I think one of the things that probably wasn't drummed into me when I worked in a more corporate environment, and one of the things that Nick has been instrumental at, and Martin, who is our COO, is be generous. People will recognise it, they will value it, and they will vote with their feet. And nobody, doesn't matter how much money you've got in your back pocket, everybody likes to feel well looked after and likes to feel like they've had a good deal and has a perception of what value is. And the moment you start to sort of cut back, and which often happens when times are tough, the customer sees it and notices it, and you won't have a big overnight, step change in performance, but you'll erode all that goodwill that you've spent a long time putting together. So, we have almost a philosophy: if times are tough, go bigger and go harder rather than cut back accordingly, and actually that's been a real lesson for me on this journey, and I think something that I will take with me whatever I do, whether it's here or elsewhere in the future.
That's good to know, because that's how hospitality should be, I think, isn't it? We've made hospitality a business, but traditionally that kind of thing of open your door and allow your family and your friends in and sit around a table and be generous and kind of guests always eat and drink first. The tradition, the kind of where hospitality came from is steeped in that, and too many businesses forget it. So keeping that at the heart of what you do, I think genuine hospitality is key.
Yeah, it's our bedrock, really.
Yeah. What makes it interesting. I could stay on the mammoth scale of the Ned and all sorts of stuff, but I want to chat around some of the kind of traditional or perceived issues, I suppose, around this, which again you do on a huge scale. So recruitment is considered to be particularly challenging in hospitality, I suppose, trying to convince people that this is a career and not just a stopgap between kind of college and university. And particularly it feels like in the last few years around chefs, and then we've managed to do well, actually, not mentioning the Brexit word until now, but the challenges of that kind of ability to flex the workforce. You said you've got 1,000 people working in the building. Mm. Is it difficult to find and train them? And what are you doing to get around that?
Yeah, it's really hard. Make no mistake. And the problem is, as well as needing 1,000 people, I need 1,000 seasoned operators, really. I mean, we do have some apprentices, don't get me wrong. We do have some management trainees, some graduates, people who've not worked in hospitality before. But it's not for everybody here. Like, this is a really tough place to work. It's very busy. And so I'm often looking for people who, need to have a track record that suggests they're gonna have the stamina, for want of a better word, to be successful here. So it's definitely difficult for us. We were very creative, I think, in the lead up to opening. We recognised, which was bang around the Brexit vote, and we realised things hadn't gone our way, or certainly the way we needed them to go, if we were going to be reliant on migrant labour and Europeans to continue coming to the UK. And we said, well, if they're not coming here, we are not going to find the number of people we need to open this building in time. So we flipped it on its head and we said, well, if they won't come here on their own accord, we'll go and get them. And so we set up recruitment offices in Spain and in Italy, and we've subsequently set one up in Romania, where essentially we have our own in-house recruitment agency. So they are either employed full-time by us, or they are contractors who are exclusively retained by us. And every now and again, we will establish. So, for example, Italy is a big source of where our chefs come from. Not for every restaurant, of course, but for a lot. And we will go to Italy once we have a pool of applicants and actually use training kitchens that we have managed to secure over there. And we'll put everybody through an audition / a trial / a cook-off, and decide that of that number of 20 chefs we've met today, 8 of them would be great for us. And we'll send a team out from here, the executive chef of a particular restaurant, wherever it may be, and he'll go and he'll say, I've assessed them, and he'll bring them back, and we will, we found that one of the barriers was people were nervous about, well, where am I going to live when I get there? And, I just don't even have the £200 to pay for my flight. So, provided someone stays with us for 12 months after we bring them over, we pay for their flight, we pay for their first 2 weeks accommodation, which we is a cost to us. We don't own a staff house or anything like that. We find premises locally, and we fund that, and we also give them an Oyster card and a bit of pocket money to make sure they, for the first few days, they can find their feet, and that's been really successful for us. And despite all the sort of headwind that we face as an industry in regards to attracting, overseas labour, it's allowed us to actually, more or less service our needs. It's still tough. I can't pretend that, that tactic alone is all that we need to do. But we are, in a pretty good place, all things considered. And I have somewhere in the region of 160 chefs at any one time in the building.
Are they permanent offices overseas, or is this something you do as and when you need it? You'll sort of send a team over? Or?
No, it's pretty permanent. And we also have the ability to dovetail with Soho House. So, there are times when we'll do a joint trip, and Soho House will have a requirement, and we might have a requirement, and so joining forces and going out as a team, one team, has been really successful for us. Or if for some reason we can't make a trip for whatever reason, and go and join up with our counterparts over there, then they can go for us, or vice versa. So, but they are permanent offices, yeah. And
but they're literally just recruiting in-house. You don't offer that as a service to.
Yeah, we don't recruit for any other business. No, I mean, it'd be lovely to
just
think.
About to ask for a couple.
Yeah, well, it'd be lovely to think that we would exhausted all our own requirements, but we are growing as a company as well. I think that's the other point to know.
Yeah.
Since the Ned opened, the parent company Soho House has opened 10, 11 places, not all in the UK, in Europe as well. But, we need to do that just to sustain and fulfill our own requirements.
Yeah. So how many people did you have before you actually opened the doors on the books ready to go?
Total headcount, from memory, I think total headcount when we opened the doors, it was about 650.
Right.
So, and I think we thought 750 would probably be what we needed. And we learned very quickly it wasn't. Fortunately, we were busier far more quickly than we thought we would be as well. So actually, it was sort of self-funding. The additional, we just underestimated the payroll requirement. We underestimated the payroll requirement relative to the business levels. So it's been overall a great success actually. But when you suddenly realise within probably a month of trading that we're actually turning away a lot of business here, or we're not servicing it as well as we could do, or we're not turning tables as quickly as we should, you're suddenly forced into a big rethink. And we were lucky that, again, being part of a bigger group, there was a task force that we were able to lean on. But task force helped me out. It didn't help some of the other businesses, and so that's always going to be a short-term thing. But it was tough, but we got through it. I'm glad to say it's a sort of a distant memory now, nearly.
Yeah, you're right. You can only flex people and get them all on 7-day weeks and put in that extra effort in short term. And I think people will when you first open, because everybody realizes you can't plan for it, but it's not sustainable, particularly in in the heat of the kitchen when those guys are doing 7-day weeks. They need some downtime to manage it. So I've had that experience. How far in advance were they here, and how do you go about training to open something like this? Because it's different when you're bringing people into an existing business and you can train, on the floor and you can kind of hit the ground running. But to get that size, 8 restaurants, all these rooms open on a certain day, it must be like, choreographing a huge team of people. How far in advance do you get them in? And are there any little nuggets of wisdom you've learned of how to pull that off?
That's a great question, actually. And it's not something I've thought a lot about since being open.
Sorry to bring back these memories.
No, it's a really good point, because that actually was something that kept me awake at night. Because I felt very strongly that we needed to have people here much earlier than some of the people I worked with, and particularly my boss, who was
looking at the payroll,
who was saying, "Listen, we can't afford to have all these people here. And actually, what are they going to do anyway? They can't get, if you can't get into a kitchen, then what are you going to do with them?" And there's some definite truth in that. And I suppose what became quite apparent is, and I say this carefully because it's not entirely accurate, but work sometimes expands to fill the time available. So if you tell somebody you've got 48 hours to be ready for something, and I'm not talking about specifically the onboarding and the training, but you've got 48 hours to organise this office, kitchen, workspace, whatever it might be, or you give them 96 hours. The truth is they'll probably get the same amount of work done to some degree. And of course, the later we brought people on, the more finished the building was, and the less likelihood. I mean, there was examples of cleaning bedrooms and having them all ready to go, bar the beds made and everything, completely clean, and then some builder was, I need to go back into all the bedrooms and I need to recalibrate the air conditioning system or something. And before you know it, there's dust everywhere again, because there's dust in the ductwork and the pipe. And you may as well have not bothered. And so there were things like that I remember thinking, oh, crikey, I'm very glad actually we didn't have too many people doing too much of that beforehand. But it did put a huge pressure on us to sort of almost be able to sort of hit the ground running. Which some people did very well, and others it was probably overwhelming. I mean, and understandably so. We do something called Club School here, which is a sort of a mass onboarding, which is very practical. It's not sort of sitting in a room listening to PowerPoint for 3 days. We do sort of maybe half a day of that. All the important stuff that we need to sort of share, visually. But then we do a huge amount of work around practical training, and even interview stage. No one was being no sort of hands-on employee was being asked to sit down and spend 30 minutes telling us about their career. They were being asked to demonstrate, like, here, I'll make me a martini and then run it over to that table over there, even if it happened to be a building site at the time. And how do you carry your tray? How do you carry yourself? Do you spill it? And so we were really very, very particular about making sure we were assessing the skills that mattered, rather than having these sort of quite conventional sort of interactions with people in a meeting room around. So tell me about yourself. I mean, that doesn't actually matter too much, really. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
No, it's perfect. It's actually very refreshing to hear, because I have this, as why I enjoy these conversations, this sort of misconception, I suppose, of the luxury of having your team in 60 days in advance. And I hadn't really appreciated, I guess, that you have the same challenge, where actually there's an inevitability about the fact that even if you think the kitchen's going to be ready 2 weeks before you open, there's a problem with the gas supply, or the extraction's not ready, and these things get delayed. And like you say, the multiple cleaning of rooms before a builder goes back in. So it's just nice to hear that even when you're well financed and well backed, that you face the same challenges and opportunities, because like you say, you save a lot of cash by not bringing people in 2 months in advance. But it's almost incomprehensible to imagine the amount of pressure that you would have been under on those first couple of weeks to train live on the job, because it does take time for people to bed in. It must be. I've always thought you've had a ridiculously stressful job, Gareth, but I think it might actually have improved from those first couple of months when you first opened.
I think it has slightly, yeah.
Yeah. Staying on HR, I know we need to wrap up shortly because of time. But the Ned won a Human Resources Team of the Year award. Can you just explain a little bit about what you do, not only to find the people, but then how you keep them in the business, I guess?
Yeah, that's something that, being very candid with you, I don't think we did well in year one, and I don't think that's because we didn't think it was important, or didn't feel that we were at risk of losing people. I think there was so much going on that everything needed everyone's attention, and it was slightly chaotic, and at the start it was probably very chaotic, and everything needs nurturing when you're a new business, and none more so than your people. And I think there was only so much nurturing we could do. So we definitely lost some people that probably should have worked out here and would have been brilliant. I don't know I don't quite know what I would have done differently. If I'm honest, there's lots we could have done. But some of that was sort of circumstantial. But subsequently, certainly after the first 6 months, we really, as things started to settle a little bit, we really put a huge amount of emphasis on not only the ability to attract talent, but to retain the talent that was through the door, and recognise that you can spend £200 million on a building, but if you can't bring it to life in the right way, then actually that's slightly an academic exercise. We I think, are much better employers today than we've been historically. We've introduced a number of new benefits, so we allow a little bit more flexibility around working. We're actually trialing in some areas. I can't pretend in all areas because it's not practical, but 4-day weeks for where possible. I think that's trying to take a lead from some of these sort of more progressive sort of tech type companies, and it's not just that. We are seeing it in hospitality as well. A number of high profile chefs that have said we're going to our kitchens to a 4-day week. We're looking at that. We give back. We give people some paid time off to spend time working in a charity that we have several pillars here, and as long as the charity aligns to one of our pillars, then we're very happy for people to be paid to go and spend some time supporting those charities, which I think means a lot to a lot of people, particularly this sort of Gen Z who feel very connected with sort of a larger agenda, should we say. We have improved, staff welfare. I mean, all the emphasis when we first opened was on does front of house work, and our customers walking through the door, handing us their money and leaving with a good experience. Well, actually, what's happening at the back door, and actually, are we taking care of people from the moment they arrive, and do we have enough uniform and the right uniform, and or is that person still waiting for a pair of trousers, or what's the quality of the food in the canteen like? And obvious stuff, really obvious stuff. And anyone listening to this will be thinking, well, tell me something I don't know. But it's very easy to sort of maybe underestimate how important that is, and to maybe not be clear about what is good and what is great and what is outstanding. And a lot of what we do, we try and be exceptional or outstanding, and sort of internal language we use. And so, well, can we apply that to every part of our business? And if we can't, then why can't we? And what do we need to do about it? So that was a big thing, and a big sort of look yourself in the mirror moment for me and my senior team and all our HODs, and said, what are we not getting right? And there was a lot. I have to be honest, there was a lot. I mean, we didn't have enough lockers. I remember at one point I realised there were about 100 staff. I couldn't even give them a locker. We'd underestimated with the growth. I mentioned the growth that we thought we had extra lockers, and with the growth, the headcount grew beyond our provision of facilities. And we said, hang on a second. And the opening hours of the canteen aren't right. We can't feed everyone. So it's now an all-day dining room rather than, with lunch service for 4 hours, closed for 2 hours, dinner service for 3 hours. So all that stuff, which, until you sort of stop and take stock of it, what can be quite simple fixes make a big difference can be sort of, completely pass you by. So
I think there's a certain irony in our industry that we specialise in hospitality and we specialise at looking after people, but so often that's neglected with your in-house team, and not necessarily through choice, because we're naturally hospitable people. It's why we work in the industry. It's just bloody hard behind the scenes. It's long hours. It's tough. If the customers are there and they need looking after, that's your primary focus, and it's what you'll do. And the fact that somebody's having to pull an all-day shift or hasn't had a break or hasn't eaten, the customer always comes first. But remembering that and then putting the time and the energy into managing it is key. But it's challenging for the whole industry. So I don't think people will be listening going, Well, that's obvious. I think they'll be going, yeah, it's obvious, but it's bloody hard to actually pull off in this sector. But we've got to do it because that's our whole reason for being, is to look after people. And the number of chefs I've had who you think, God, you're not seeing your family and you're not seeing your kids because you're always in the kitchen, you're working so bloody hard. What an irony that here we are looking after the public so that they get time with their families, yet you don't get to see yours. So it's a challenge for the industry, I think. And the 4-day week is one solution, but with increasing costs and pension costs and lack of staff, it's complicated.
Really complicated.
One of the other things, and you touched on it then with Generation Z and our sort of big picture kind of perspective, I guess, is around sustainability. And we're seeing it with plastic in the oceans, and we're seeing it around with more sort of vegan diners. How does hospitality have a responsibility in sustainability? And is there any examples you've got again of where you've managed to have an impact on that?
Well, we I think, without stating the obvious, we are huge consumers, aren't we? I mean, the amount of resources we use. The food we buy, the food we could waste, and I think wastage is a big thing. And, there is so much that goes on in a building of this size where inefficiencies can creep in and not only be, detrimental to the environment, but to the P&L as well, actually. So, waste alone, I can just think of, our refuse disposal here is enormous. And, things like segregating cardboard glass is sort of fairly obvious, but then, wet food waste versus, paper product versus oil versus, light bulbs and all that sort of stuff. And, when you first open, you are frankly worried about, can you get everything in and can you get everything out? That's it. And it's another example of where we've really now had the time to really refine how we do things. We've made a positive impact on our P&L, and I feel like I have a sort of slightly better conscience about when I go to bed at night that, we're not doing anything that is overly harmful, should we say. I'm not saying we're saints by any means, but we're certainly, have a very clean conscience. The piece around sustainability and hospitality, I think that's a moving target, actually. And what was once okay, like people saying, we use free range chicken. Like, if anyone's still saying they're doing that and are proud of it, I think that's just an absolute given. I mean, I think it's scary if someone still thinks that's sort of at the forefront of innovation. And I think all that sort of stuff is moving on. You talk about the vegan or the plant-based diet is becoming more and more important, and people are more and more conscious of what they're eating. And there's a lot there's a lot that we're doing, but there's a lot that we're observing where we're not necessarily fully committed at this time. I mean, there's sometimes a fine line between what is a trend and a trend that's going to stay versus what might be something that might be a moment in time or a bit of a fad, dare I say it. I don't think that is a fad, but I think, I'm not jumping on that bandwagon and in a way that I think undermines what we've done to date. The Green Tourism Business Scheme is something that we signed up to, and they've been really good at helping us. They provided a framework for us to assess ourselves really and say, what are we doing in this regard or that regard, and we have a silver accreditation, and we're actively working towards a gold accreditation this year. We are partnered with a couple of charities who are local and are tied into hospitality. So a great example of one that I'm very passionate about is Kitchen Social, who are a charity set up to provide nutrition and education for children whose parents are either unable or incapable of providing them with a hot meal during the school holidays. And we donate ingredients, but we also donate chefs who go in during the holiday periods, teach young children about cooking and about nutrition, and then at the end of the day, they actually get a nice hot meal. And that's really important, and it really resonates with a lot of people here, and those schools are often, within boroughs very local to the Ned, so it ticks a sort of another box as well. And there are more and more charities like that, or opportunities to engage in activities that are not just the traditional, donate me a free night stay, please, and it'll be raffled for some very good cause at an auction next week. And we do some of that as well, of course, but we're trying to be a lot more considered in terms of how we support the agenda that is about sort of sustainability and trying to make the world a slightly nicer place, or certainly make London a better place.
Perfect. I think you're right. It's a moving target, and you've got to realise: is it just something that the BBC have grabbed hold of this week, and all of a sudden there's a huge amount of noise around it, or does it genuinely make a difference? And is it something that we can sustain over a period of time? Lastly, you mentioned then about working with schools, and you mentioned universities earlier. Is there anything either that you've particularly learned, or any bit of advice that you've heard being given regularly, business advice or hospitality advice, where you go, that's just bloody nonsense? I've been working in this industry all my life. I guarantee you it's not like that. Or the flip side, any really good nugget, anything you've been told, any bit of wisdom for anybody thinking of working in this sector or opening a business where you go, yes, that's probably the most important thing you need to succeed?
Wow, that's a good question. I think, there's a couple of things that definitely resonate with me. I've probably touched on them. So I go back to sort of recap almost. The idea that generosity and hospitality are inextricably linked. People talk about the Ned as being sort of brave and ambitious. Maybe the principles of great sort of hospitality and hotel keeping haven't changed. Warmth of welcome, cleanliness. A full belly and a warm experience. That these things, since go back thousands of years, these haven't changed. The technology's changed and design's changed and facilities and people's lives have changed. But the principles are still the same, and I think that's that. And that won't ever change. I think there's definitely a correlation between sort of the harder you work, so the luckier you get in hospitality. I think if I look at my top performing people, without fail, they're all super hard workers. And if I look at those that I don't think, achieve their potential sometimes, I think it's what you put in, what you get out. And I think hospitality will always be tied to, I don't want fatigue to be a badge of honour, but there's no getting away from the hard work that it takes to be successful. I do say to some of the team here, and particularly those that are non-office based, and we don't have a big back office actually. We have most of our resources deployed on the floor, looking after customers and guests and members. And I say, get a really comfy pair of shoes. Be kind to your feet. They'll be kind to you. That point I made earlier around, vision is one thing, courage is something else, and you need courage and vision in equal measure to really deliver something special. And probably the one other thing that I often reflect on is capital actually isn't always the scarcest of resources. I think it's about creativity, and I wish you could bottle creativity. But I think about some of the things that we are most proud of here and some of our biggest successes, and it comes from where we've been really creative. And I gave the example of how we threw the kitchen sink at trying to create a Sunday lunch destination, and we've done that. And there's lots of other things that the team, that I can take no credit for, by the way, that the team have done. And it's, it's a really creative bunch of people here who have allowed us to, get a bit of a reputation, if you like, for being sort of an interesting place to come and experience. So yeah, those would be my sort of 3 or 4 sort of sound bites. I guess.
There's some good nuggets in there. I think we're very lucky in this sector that there are so many creatives. There's so many people who are musicians or graphic designers or artists who end up working in here. Most of my team end up, they carry crayons more than they carry a laptop, and I love that. It's one of the best things about the sector, although I think you're the first person that said the key thing you need in hospitality is a comfy pair of shoes, and that's my quote of the day. I think you're right. Just start there, isn't it? Yeah, walk comfy. I could talk all day, but we're out of time. You in particular are out of time, so I'm conscious I need to let you go. Where should people go if they want to find out more about the Ned or about you personally? Can they get online, social media? What's the best place to do?
Yeah, I think the best place to do that is to go, if you want to find out a bit more about the business, then it's www.thened.com. Instagram is our primary social channel. There we are on Twitter and Facebook too, which is the Ned London. And please take a look. There's lots of visual content there, obviously, that give you a sense of what we're about. Or come and see us. We are directly above Bank Underground Station. So all are welcome. As I said before, there's lots here to see and something for everybody.
Okay. And do you know what's next? Last question for you personally.
For me, I got an inkling of what might be next, which is really to do with expansion of the Ned brand. I think we designed this as a one-off, and it suddenly found that there's a lot of interest and from investors to do more of these. So we are announcing, or we have announced, I should say, Ned's Club. It will not be the full-blown hotel, but it will be an extension of the club we have here in Washington, D.C. And we're also looking at other sites now in other sort of major cities where we would like to do more Ned's and Ned's Clubs. So expansion is definitely on the horizon. And as long as we continue to, hopefully do a good job here and not take our eye off the ball, that should be a reality.
You're a sucker for punishment. You're going to go and start it all again in another city. Good luck. Congratulations on what you've done. I think it's brilliant. And I love your authenticity and your kind of, relaxed demeanour. I'm sure behind the scenes there must be some chaotic stuff going on in your head.
Plenty.
But you're very calm, and it's a real pleasure to get to spend some time with you. So thank you, Gareth.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So there you have it. You have reached the end of another episode of the Humans of Hospitality podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please go and visit our website, humansofhospitality.co.uk, for the show notes and extra episodes and information. And whilst you're there, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and to receive free materials all about the humans behind our incredible industry. Lastly, if you could subscribe, rate and review this podcast, you will be massively helping me out, and it would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much. We'll be launching another podcast in just 7 days' time. Cheers.